Welcome to the Northern Ontario Mining Showcase podcast. It's a limited series for the Echo Community Podcast Network by Story Studio Network and Clark Communications. We highlight the influential voices, partners, and leaders who are driving innovation, research, and development, creating new market opportunities and new ways of doing business in the mining industry.
Marcus Powlowski, Member of Parliament, Thunder Bay, Rainy River, and I'm a Liberal MP.
And it's, here I have been living in Toronto now for, since 1968.
Too long.
Right? And all of these years, Marcus, I never knew that this was the center of the universe for mining. No, really.
Toronto is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. When this event in
I
and
thought
of
it was
itself.
Northern Ontario was the center.
Well, but it all has come to this event here, and traditionally that's where it has been. I mean, it's as far away from the mining, digging holes in the ground as you might want to be. But it occurs to me as I talk to people here, there's an important story to tell. There are some really innovative stories to be told, the economic stories to be told. I'm not sure we're telling them very well.
We as a country aren't telling those stories.
The industry.
About specifically about mining.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think and certainly you see here, and here we are in this Northern Ontario pavilion, the number of companies that relate to mining. I mean, there's the mining companies, yes, okay, but there are people that make the equipment. So there's one place that has a rack that's kind of automated, so instead when you take the rock samples, you don't have to manually move them. It tilts them for you. And then someone else has a company that weighs when you, on the conveyor belt, all this rock comes out, then it figures out the total number of rocks based on the weight and the speed and things, but it's all automated again. So a company makes that machine. And then there's other companies that do the security for it, other companies that do like the auditing for it. And so it all relates to that. So there's a lot of spin-off jobs, I think, particularly in Northern Ontario. But I think even you look in Toronto, there's probably all kinds of people employed in administration, executives, that kind of thing related to mining. So yeah, no, it's a big deal, and I think it's a really major part of our economy, and something, maybe as a government we don't, well, actually we do, and I think because of the green transition, it now has become a kind of a central platform for our government, trying to assist in that green transition, so to making, for example, electric batteries, but you need chromium to make galvanized steel. You need nickel to make, I think, galvanized steel, and those go into turbines. So it has, and I think in the past, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, as a federal government, you might say there's not a lot of involvement or a lot of interest. But I think with critical minerals, it's really changed. So.
Well, and the point has been put on the end of the spear by saying we're not going to have fossil fuel burning vehicles within the next decade or so. So that in and of itself has created a sense of urgency, whether it's artificial or not doesn't really matter anymore.
Well, yeah. So I think there's two things, and certainly climate change and okay, maybe it was El Nino this year, but this is in Thunder Bay, like the outdoor rinks basically weren't open almost the whole winter because it was too warm, and that's never happened in my life. This was the first Christmas ever in Thunder Bay that wasn't a white Christmas. There was no snow. And certainly you look around the world and the number of climate-related disasters, whether it's fires or flooding or big storms, it certainly seems to be getting a lot worse, and certainly that's what the experts say. So, I mean, the green transition is fueled by that, by climate change. But then also, I think the geopolitical situation where, we don't want to be dependent on the Russians or the Chinese, and for good reasons. And so we don't want to have to get our lithium for our batteries from China, and their lithium is very dirty. So, I mean, they refine the lithium using electricity generated from coal power plants, right? So I mean, and when you hear people say, well, if you actually look at the carbon footprint of an electric vehicle versus a gas-burning vehicle, and they say, well, it's actually not that different, because when you calculate you make the electric battery, but it costs so much and produces so much pollution to do it. Well, that's if you get your lithium from China, but if you get it from Canada, cleaner lithium, then it makes a lot more sense. And apparently that's kind of the way the world's going. That companies not only look at, like, you make lithium, but how green are you in making the lithium?
So yes, and then that's a much broader peripheral view of how we're going to have to tackle this problem. And here's where I have a challenge with the political discussion of this, is that we want to put it into one lane or another. For example, to be able to say we are going to eliminate fossil fuel burning vehicles because we're going to go to the EV, and the lithium that comes from China is dirtier than it is wherever else we might acquire it. That is a very specific and tight lane to talk about our overall environment strategy, first of all. And, lest we get into the whole question around the carbon tax. But, there are ways, to me, that we can be attacking and, really doing important work in mitigating climate change that has nothing to do with the carbon tax. Yeah. And I want to know where that conversation is for the federal Liberals.
Well, no, I think the carbon tax, and it wasn't actually the Liberals that made it.
That's not the point. That's not the point.
No, but
you understand. Right now, we live where it is.
But because a certain individual in a certain party likes to harp on about the carbon tax, but it's only one part.
I got
of
news
the
for you.
solution.
He's not the only one harping. People I talk to just generally look at that and say it's being added to and it's a cost of living issue. My point is not about arguing with the carbon tax.
No.
My point is to say that the solution to the carbon or the environment is not just carbon tax. And in fact, I think it's a very blunt instrument that's not very effective, because it hasn't stopped me from driving my car.
Well, I think, though, a lot of, even conservative economists believe that the carbon tax is one of the most efficient ways of trying to get people to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions. But, it is only one of many ways, and I think, and for example, like another thing which you wouldn't have thought was a big environmental issue related to greenhouse gases is the amount of wasted food.
Yeah.
So as people say, like the refrigerator is a place for your food to go to die, right? And so we all you go to the grocery store and you buy all this stuff and you end up throwing out a lot of stuff because you don't use it, right? But if you actually calculate the amount of greenhouse gases that were created by the fact that, you grow the lettuce, you have to transport it, there's all these costs and all this fuel burned in the process, and then you just throw it out. So, there are, and if you look at, I think, globally, the causes of greenhouse gas emissions, like trying to get people to waste less food, you wouldn't have thought that was an important way of dealing with global warming, but in fact, it turns out that it is. So
are you teeing up a carbon tax on my head of lettuce?
Yeah,
is that what you're doing?
On your refrigerator? We're the Liberal government. We're bringing it to you.
There you go.
I'll advocate against that.
Just take me back to what's going on here, because the conversation around mining, particularly, it has often taken it on the chin, and for many good reasons, for not being the environmental steward that they need to be. Yeah. Give me your read of where you hear the industry, particularly in Northern Ontario, and their realization that they're not just committed to it. There has to be an ROI in there for them.
ROI.
Return on investment.
Oh yeah. Well, in partly it's because there is a better market when things are done green. I think more and more investors worry about and think about the reputation of the company, what it's doing to Indigenous communities, those kind of things. It's like it's bad publicity to have a company which doesn't do the right things. And I think more and more, and even if you're a mining executive, you have kids, and the kids probably worry about the environment and things. The world's changed place. And so it used to be you could put in a big open pit mine and it creates a little local disaster, but mining companies are in Toronto and they don't see the fact that there's this big awful hole in the ground. It'll stay there forever. So I think mining companies now appreciate the fact that they have to try to minimize their footprint environmentally, and I think there is a return of investment on that if you don't do it. Well, I think now, in fact, I think with the rules, whether federally, provincially, you have to consider these things. And so I think mining's really changed over the years. And people, I don't think, And you know, I mean, even my own party, I would say there are people who, both with respect to mining and forestry, is kind of see it as the enemy, which I certainly don't think it is the enemy. I mean, they're looking at like how it was 30 years ago when you just kind of clear-cut, logged, and you didn't plant trees afterwards. Anyhow, I think both the forestry and mining industry have gone a long ways in terms of trying to do things in a more environmentally friendly way. So I think some people have this kind of like 1950s view of mining and forestry, and it's really progressed since then.
Yeah, we actually do a lot of work with the forestry industry, and the name of the podcast, not to overstate it, is Canadian Forestry Can Save the World. Yeah. But that there is a role in terms of the innovation in these industries that will reduce, mitigate, in fact, in some cases, if you play it right, you know, carbon capture and storage, all those sorts of things that can reverse the effects of carbon, the greenhouse gas emission. Yeah. And that's what I get at, the point that we're so focused on a carbon tax in Ottawa, as opposed to saying, here's the incentive to create programming for biofuels and biofuel generation for energy, and we're talking about carbon capture and storage in Alberta. We don't get to that conversation.
Well, and I know we're probably on different sides of this issue, but I mean, there is a certain person in party in the House of Commons that goes on incessantly about the carbon tax, and so like in some question periods, it's like 20 times the Conservatives ask the same question because of your inflationary carbon tax, blah blah blah. So I mean, and they ought to be talking about those other things. For example, other creative ways of reducing greenhouse gases. I mean, you have 20 questions. Why do you keep asking the same question about?
Well, because they get the same answer, and I don't want to litigate the carbon tax. That's not my point. Yeah. My point is to say, where's the government of the day to be able to say, carbon tax is an element of it, and why aren't we talking about carbon capture and storage? Why aren't we talking about more efficient forest management? Why aren't we talking about more uses of bioenergies that are going to be able to fuel some of these mines effectively and reducing greenhouse gases?
Well, you know, if Pierre Poilievre stands up in the House of Commons and asks about, like, what are we doing to
I'm
reducing...
asking you.
Well, you're
this
saying,
is question period now, Marcus.
Why are you saying, why don't we talk about this? I think, I mean, if you ask, and I think, and I know, and I don't know, Stephen Guilbeault and the right thinks he's some kind of radical, but I think if you ask, like,
go ahead.
But I think if you ask Stephen Guilbeault some of these questions, the guy's very knowledgeable. I mean, he spent his whole life on these things, and so if you ask him about, like, how do we reduce the amount of carbon, greenhouse gas emissions are involved in the production of food, for example, in the farm, he could give you a fairly expansive answer to that. Now, that's, I mean, as a parliamentarian, you may know my background's medical. Mm-hmm. I got some legal background. I've worked a lot internationally. So, I mean, and there's a lot of environmentalists in our party, and so really it's not my area of particular expertise, but I think, because if you ask and say, why aren't we looking at these other things, I think people are. I mean, I don't think we're like a one-trick pony, and it's like our one trick is carbon tax. But
I'm just saying, if I were advising the prime minister, I would say, change the channel on carbon tax. Start talking about carbon capture and storage. Start talking about bioenergy and biofuels. Talking about reducing the carbon emissions from our forest fires. That's huge. We're not talking about that stuff, and that's a gift to you. No, but like you say, when Pierre Poilievre stands up 20 times in the House of Commons and asks about the carbon tax, then it's kind of hard to talk about something else, and they do try to change the channel sometimes and say, well, you should be talking about this and this, and maybe that is something they should say. Well, okay, you want to address greenhouse gases? How about something else? Yeah. Right.
Okay. I'll bring it to the party.
The problem is it's question period, not answer period. Right? Is that what it is? Marcus, thanks for dropping by.
Well, here's one. So someone told me, I won't say which minister is. He's going in for question periods. He said, I hope they ask the questions which fit with my responses.
I've watched that channel. Thanks for being here.
Okay,
it's good to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to the Northern Ontario Mining Showcase podcast. The series is produced for the Echo Community Podcast Network by Story Studio Network and Clark Communications. For more information, visit our website, northbayecho.ca.